What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another Scary Stories video. And today's video is actually inspired by a comment I got on last week's video, and so today we're looking through scary trucking experiences. Truckers of Reddit, what spooky things did you witness on the road? This is gonna get long. Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I was delivering and installing machines for the company I was working for. I was in a 26-foot box with 12 machines in the back. I was having trouble with the truck the day before, had it checked out by the rental company, and these said it was all good. Since I was behind schedule due to the truck and problems with installations, I decided to drive late to my next destination. It was about 11 o'clock at night on a state road through the Upper Peninsula. There were no street lights, there were no other cars. The headlights from my truck were the only thing illuminating the road. I was already creeped out. At the peak of feeling like I was in the middle of nowhere, because I was in fact in the middle of nowhere, every single light on the dashboard of the truck lit up and then it stalled. Now it's pitch black. I'm stopped and the truck isn't restarting. Rather than eat up the battery trying to turn it over, I shut everything down and started making phone calls. As I was calling everyone and anyone that would listen, I sat in the dark night, with only the light being from my hazard lights. I looked up and saw something move in front of the truck, just at a distance of the flashing lights. At first I thought it was my imagination. I finally got a hold of someone and they told me it would be 2 to 3 hours before they could get a mechanic to me. So now I'm sitting in silence. The only noise is the clicking the hazard lights are making, and I'm staring out of the windshield into a void of darkness when I see movement again. Just as I was about to shit my pants, my phone rang and that nearly secured the pants shitting because it scared the hell out of me. It was a mechanic that wanted me to get out, open the hood, and check some things out. Nope, I'm not getting out of the truck, with an explanation as to why. He was irritated with me, but I didn't care. So finally, after seeing the movement just at a range of the lights one more time, I threw on the headlights with the high beams. The headlights caught 3 wolves snacking on something that looked like roadkill. I honked the horn and they looked at me like they were irritated more than scared. I was safe. The wolves more than likely weren't going to bother me, but it was just spooky knowing they were there, so I shut the lights off. I would turn the lights on occasionally to see if they were still there. I was basically just sitting there listening to the hazard flashes click while surfing my phone. Each time I turned the lights on, the wolves were still there. Just to remind you, I'm in the middle of nowhere. No homes, no business, nothing but trees, wilderness, and wolves. I suddenly heard what I can only equate to a woman's scream of terror that sounded like it came from right behind the truck. Then something slammed into the side of the truck, hard enough to rock it. I wasn't afraid of the truck tipping over, but whatever hit it hard enough to rock the suspension enough to move me around in the cab. It was a pretty heavy truck. I turned every light that truck had on, slipped it into reverse so the reverse lights came on, and laid on the horn. I was checking both mirrors and the only thing I saw was a shadow bolt across the road. I couldn't make out what it technically was, but in my head it was werewolf, yeti, Bigfoot, lizard monster that was going to end my life, and it was going to be agonizingly painful the entire time. I also noticed the wolves were gone. From every nature documentary I've watched, the only time predators leave food is when there are bigger, badder predators around. By this time, I was in full Bobby Hill, that's my purse, I don't know you mode. Whatever crossed the road didn't cross very far off the road. I could hear it thrashing around in the brush, breaking sticks and what sounded to be logs. There was no noise pollution. I only had my window cracked a little bit and I could hear pretty well. I basically had the steering wheel gripped, all the lights on, and was feverishly looking out the windows and through the mirrors to make sure nothing was around the immediate area of the truck. I couldn't see off the road, and the flashlights I had were in the back of the truck in my tool bag. I'd have to get out of the truck to get to them. Finally, I saw some headlights through one of my mirrors. It seemed like it took hours for them to close the distance to me. The noise stopped as the headlights approached. It was obviously the mechanic because no one else was stupid enough to be out there besides me. The mechanic pulled out in front of me. My headlights were shining on him and his truck. As his door opened to step out, we both hear the woman screaming in terror yell again, and the brush thrashing intensified. Whatever it was still close and pissed. His door immediately closed and my phone rang. He called my phone asking what it is. He sounded more panicked than me. I had no clue what it was and he had no clue what it was. So the mechanic called the police. He wouldn't work on my truck until we could secure the area, which I don't blame him. He didn't like my idea of him getting out of his truck just to check things out. 2 Michigan State police officers show up. They lit that area up like it was a stadium. I finally stepped out of the truck for the first time since it all started. We heard that scream 3 more times while the mechanic was working on my truck. Thankfully, they were getting farther away. The cops had no clue what it was either. They were kind of spooked too. The mechanic finally got my truck running and I made it to my hotel for the night. The next morning, I walked the truck for inspection. In the side that was hit, there was an indentation about the size of a basketball. Whatever hit it didn't hit it hard enough to push all the way through, but it definitely mushed the fiberglass. The indentation was about 7 feet off the ground. I have no idea what it was. I probably never will. I do confidently know that I will never ever drive through the Upper Peninsula at night again. This is my father's story, and he wasn't a long-haul trucker, but rather an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s, and without a certain long-haul trucker, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was 24 hours, and my dad was the only one working the night shift, 11 to 7, I think. The guy comes in and just gives him the creeps. Seems sketchy. He was wearing tight jacket/pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer, and it was warm, so why is he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of truck drivers used this station. It was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch on the highway. They also had a big lot where they let truckers park and sleep or take a break. On this night at this time, it was just my dad, sketchy dude, and one trucker in there he kinda knew, as in came in frequent enough to be conversational, and asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booth. They had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out that this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States in the 1970s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store. Dad did not have any protection or weapon of any kind. So the hours passed and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this guy in a car comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area and my dad's station was the first place he found. Calls 911 to report that he'd walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, next closest station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else was around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehend the guy in the blue car. My dad confirms it was sketchy dude from earlier in the night and they charge him with murder and armed robbery. To the long haul trucker who waited around my dad that night, thanks, and hope you're keeping it real. So I was in the Virginia, Maryland area and had a lot of work related to sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of Virginia, got dragged off to other places even further out, the usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully late afternoon, Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere between Roanoke and DC, absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour, no tail lights either, no road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, it's foggy. I have the music up, I'm feeling good, all's fine. And then I just happen to look to the left, and there's a dog barking at me. A German Shepherd in a car passenger seat. Somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it too, because at first my brain is not registering cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus and a 75. I promptly have the oh shit moment when the dog, the instruments, the White Crown Vic / light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brake and start slowing down hard but safe to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because, wait, there is no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left where there's still no shoulder / room for another car and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the fucking highway, flipped on all my light bars and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No tail lights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine. I could see for a nice long distance both ways too. Nothing. My car had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings. There's no possible way somebody pulled this sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. So yep, there you have it. Ghost cop and his dog didn't like me speeding, apparently. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long it would take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour, but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing, like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, and he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60 miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know that there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peer down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's gonna make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that nothing blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handle started clicking again and the truck starts shifting like someone's climbing on it. I hit the alarm button in the sleeper hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly, it stops. After a few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding, I hear another truck approach, then drive by. I spend the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Around 2006-ish, I was driving flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing. Don't remember, but it was pre-packaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load in rural Tennessee. Memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee state lines. Tarp required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods, on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. Found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load and start unrolling the tarps again. And I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and I'm climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one and a hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me and the first thing I notice is his hair. It looks like a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck. Like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said, fuck it, good enough to party. The next thing I noticed were his eyes, which I can only describe as off, like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, because I remember he didn't have any laces on one shoe and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, I've got a long walk. I'm like, yeah man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere, making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself. I've got a long walk. At this point I explained that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that. Apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at and he's turned around heading back towards me. Now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face and I can barely make out his mouth moving. His other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and am climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his fucking hand. And now I'm nervous, because it doesn't look like he's having a nice, pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look into the mirror, and there's no one there. Not a truck driver, but I spent the past 4 years driving every day and night for work. I was in a very rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. Important note, it's all 2-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife and told her there was high wind advisories and very possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I'd call her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I'd already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I'd ate dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you've never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. I'd driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being a Mississippi native, I knew in July hail meant tornado. I pulled off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, no lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me, and start looking for the storm/tornado I believe is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turned to the driver's side, and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed and he was gone, slammed the truck in drive and took off. We have all the time cameras running on our trucks. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did, however, pull the SD card and check the cameras. I promise you, this guy never popped up on my front or rear cameras. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore if I don't absolutely have to. My uncle's a truck driver in Guatemala, small town with just a single road that passes through. I used to love sitting outside at night on the hammock listening to his chilling stories. I'll start with the scariest ones. 1. Can you see them? My uncle said he hired a guy from town to help him drive late shifts at night with him on the road. Story was, the guy had somehow managed to burn a house down as a kid and has since claimed to see the dead. Would occasionally swerve on the roads at nothing, or worse, my uncle said he would be sitting around when the guy would say, I see a little girl on the swing. My aunt confirmed it and said he would say things like that often. Apparently he learned to live with it or some scary third world shit. 2. The cave. My uncle said one night he was sleeping above the trailer bed, when suddenly in the distance he could see a small light approaching. As it got closer, he had a chilling realization. He described seeing a really old, wrinkly woman who held a candle, draped in dark gowns. Her nails were so long that they curled. She walked into a cave opening and disappeared. My uncle said he noped out out there real fast. 3. The horse. My uncle often likes to talk about spirits. He said one night while sleeping, a giant rabid horse tried to climb onto his truck. It would rocket back and forth, and the truck weighs an ungodly amount. He said when the rocking stopped, he jumped in and left. That's all the time we have today for the stories. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thank you, and I'll see you around.